Well, I was reading the Nag Hammadi Library on my lunch hour. I worked at a hardware store about 20 years ago, and I was out in my van, and that was around the time, I guess, when Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code, had come out. And in his book, he states that a lot of what he got about Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene and having a son was influenced by the Nag Hammadi Library. And so before I bought Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code, I went and bought the Nag Hammadi Library, which is a big thick book, like 1.5 inches thick or so. And I thought, I'm going to read this first before I read his book and see if I reach the same conclusions that he did. Then I'll read his book and see how they compare. And so when I read the Nag Hammadi Library, I was reading this part about a high place that was, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was about a high place up on a ridge, and the earth was visible from there, and you could see it out in space. And when I read that, it was like something popped open in my mind, and this flood of memories just came back. And I remembered standing on the edge of a crater, and I believe it was on the moon. And this was before I was incarnated in a human body. I was standing there, and there was a gray being beside me, and he was telling me that I had to go down there. And we were on this high place looking out, and I could see the earth hanging in space like a big beach ball. And I remember arguing with him, telling him I didn't want to go. And anyway, later when I became a Christian, I remember reading the scripture about how the devil took Jesus up to a high place and showed him all the kingdoms of the earth after he'd done this 40-day and 40-night fast. And the devil told him, I will give all this to you if you do one act of worship to me. Well, that high place, I believe, may have been this place that I remember, where I was standing on the edge of this crater looking out at the earth, because how else could you see all the kingdoms of the earth? You'd have to be pretty high up, you know. And so that's how I felt this was the same place. And I think it's kind of like a launching pad where they send you, where they send souls to earth. That's where it begins. They show you the earth and tell you have to go down there. And so I was arguing with this being, and I believe his name was Rigel. And I told him I didn't want to go. And he said, well, you have to go. He said, it's been decreed by the higher ups. So I said to him, well, what if I say no? What if I don't go? And he said, well, believe me, there's a lot worse places they could send you than Earth. You know? And I took that as like a personal threat that I had to agree to this. And he said, why don't you want to go? And I said, because I've heard so many horrible things about Earth, and I just don't have any interest in going there at all. And when I remembered that I had said that, it then occurred to me that I had heard so many horrible things about Earth meant that this is my first incarnation here, that I've never been here before. Otherwise I would have said, well, I know so many horrible things, you know. So that's how I came to the conclusion that this life that I'm in now is my first incarnation here. So this being told me, he said, well, he said, there's a guy that just has returned from a life on Earth. And he said, maybe if you talk to him, it'll alleviate some of your fear. And so I said, oh, well, okay. And so immediately I was transported into this room. It was like a barren room, nothing on the walls, no furniture except for one chair in the middle of the floor. And it was dimly lit. And this guy was sitting in the chair with his head hung low, and he just looked so sad. And I walked up to him and I said, I understand you just came back from Earth. And he looked at me and he just kind of nodded. And I said, well, what was it like? I said, was it good or was it bad? And he said, well, it's kind of a bit of both. And I said, well, is it more good than bad or more bad than good? Or how is it? And he said, well, I'm really not the right person to be asking this to. And I said, well, let me put it this way. If you had to go back, would you go? And he said, well, that's the thing. He says, I do have to go back. And I said, why? And he said, because I didn't complete my mission there. And at that point, it just suddenly occurred to me that he'd killed himself, that he never made it through his incarnation on Earth. And immediately after I stepped back from him, I was back on the ridge with this gray being beside me again. And he said, did you talk to him? And I said, oh yeah. And he said, well, did he alleviate your fears? And I said, no. I said, if anything, he made me even more fearful of going. So this being said to me, he said, if you he said, I'm going to, let's see. No, I said, if I decide to go there, will you come and check on me every now and then? And he said, yes. He says, I will do that. And I said, well, then I guess I'll go. And when I said that, I agreed to it. And that was it. I was committed. I had to go. So it turns out that this being that said he would come and visit me ended up being the leader in the incidents I had. And that was how he kept his part of the agreement, that he would come and check on me every now and then. And he did. He checked on me when I was a child, when I was a toddler. I remember him coming into my bedroom one day, and so it's it all kind of fits together, you know, because I'd wondered, why me when these incidents happened to me? Why me? And when I remembered that, then I knew why. It was because I'd asked him to.
So here is another one in my series of my experiences that I haven't shared before, just because I was too timid or didn't want to seem weird or whatever. But I'm talking to other people now, and I'm seeing more people revealing who they truly are. They remember, you know, why they came here. They remember their, I call debriefing of before incarnating or walking in to a certain timeline, or walking into an already established avatar body. And so I want to share with you my debriefing that I remember now. Actually, I remembered in 2016. So before I took over this avatar, I was standing before a council, and they all looked human they were, it was kind of like, I don't remember how many of them, but it was like a curve, like a horseshoe, kind of not a complete horseshoe, but it was like a council that was, semicircle council of males and females, uh, and different ages. I remember there was like the one main one sitting in the middle, had a beard and a mustache. I've seen him before. But in these other realms, there are councils. So there still is like governments, but of course, it's much higher vibration. They're in a different dimension. Their consciousness is much higher. But there still are laws, universal laws that need to be followed. Um, and there are councils because certain beings have more experience than others. And that's just how it is. There's older souls, there's newer souls. And so this is what this council was. It was like an elder council. That doesn't mean they all looked old, because you can't adjust the way you look. And I was just, before them, I had said, okay, let's do this. I'm ready to go. And they said to me that you are going to incarnate to help heal the feminine. And I remember going, whoa, that's a big assignment. And I remember turning around, and I flew at that point, whatever dimension I was in, thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do this? But as I'm incarnated now and realizing, yes, it's the females of humanity that during the Dark Ages, of course, were suppressed, and a lot done to females and all that. We're healing that, but we're also healing the feminine aspect of the planet.